So, this video is all about strength training for wrestling. Before you continue watching this, please watch my previous videos about strength and conditioning for wrestling, as things will be much more clear this way. You don't have to, I just recommend it. It doesn't take a genius to understand that strength is very important in wrestling. I mean, it is resistance against resistance. You pull, you push, you throw your opponents in the air. This obviously requires strength. And real strength training might not be as simple as you may think. It requires a lot of planning and mathematics actually. Please don't be spontaneous and just go to the gym and do a couple of reps on this machine, do a couple of deadlifts here and there, don't be spontaneous. I really recommend you, especially if you're new, that you have a plan beforehand. You have to realize that if you're new to something, it's too early to start experimenting and being spontaneous. You need to follow a structured approach. Exercise selections, repetitions, sets, all of those need to be written down and planned beforehand when you start. You need to be a strategist, don't be just spontaneous. Also, please know the purpose of what you're doing. Don't do an exercise or follow a program blindly. If you're gonna do a deadlift, if you're gonna do a squat, know what the benefits are, especially when it comes to wrestling specificity. For example, a deadlift, you're pulling from the ground, right? How does that translate into wrestling? How does that make you a better athlete, a better wrestler? Please understand those beforehand. It's very important. And obviously every single muscle group in your body is responsible for a specific movement. For example, you have muscles that are responsible for a push, a pull, or lifting. In wrestling terms, you have muscles that are responsible for takedowns or stand-ups or sprawls. In this study, for example, they indicate which muscle group is responsible to what when it comes to wrestling terms. So, for instance, by getting a stronger front squat, you might have increased lifting power in a double leg takedown when you're lifting your opponents in the air, because it is a similar movement with similar muscle groups used. Imagine you have two wrestlers of equal skill level. They're exactly as skilled, but one of them is stronger. Who do you think will have the advantage? That's pretty clear, obviously, the stronger one. So, studies indicate also that, not necessarily always the case, but that when you compare elite wrestlers to average wrestlers, it is usually the elite wrestlers who possess higher strength levels, and they have indicated this through various strength tests where they test the joints at different angles, how much power or effect they can generate. Once again, take this with a pinch of salt. Strength is only one component to wrestling success. It doesn't mean that if you're stronger than your competitors, you will automatically win like gold medals here and there. No, it is just one piece of the pie. But this will just give you an idea of the importance of strength at least. Off-season is all about building strength. This is a perfect opportunity for it because your competitions are lower and your wrestling training is lower as well. So use this to your advantage, build your strength. Then later, as the competitions arrive, you will smoothly transition into a more endurance-based training, but it doesn't mean you stop strength training altogether. You just go into more wrestling-specific training. And here you have an example of how the Iowa wrestlers do it. As you can see, there is a lot of heavy lifting in the off-season throughout April to August. Then they slowly transition into circuit training and in-season strength training. You see, they don't stop altogether, they maintain it. They just lower the intensity and the volume. Their goal is now to maintain the strength they have built. They don't stop it altogether. Also, when you're like 2 weeks before a competition, don't do any drastic changes. Like don't add advanced exercises and stuff. You're not gonna make any drastic improvements from this. This should have been done and planned long before. Once again, contrary to popular belief, it is important that you still continue lifting when you're in the season. The only difference here is that you maintain your strength. That is your goal instead of increasing it. You have already done that in the off-season, so this is a new phase. If you don't continue lifting in the in-season, you will start losing your strength very fast, because that is the nature of strength. If you don't maintain it, you start losing it, and it happens fast. If you're not gonna maintain your strength that you previously were spending all your time building in the off-season during this whole period, then what was the point of doing it in the first place? Like, think here. 1 to 2 sessions is enough in the in-season, and sessions are generally kept shorter. Remember, our only goal here is to maintain it, to keep that strength when we're wrestling our opponents in the competitions. So this is the structure of a lifting day for wrestling. First we will start with the speed or explosive type of exercises, and those are the ones that require the most mental focus, motor unit requirement and speed of the movement. You have to do those exercises with maximal intention of speed. Those include plyometrics, Olympic lifts, ballistic training, short sprints like 60 meters or 100 meters. Repetitions and weights are optimally kept low to moderate here, but velocity, as I said, must be maximal, 100%. Speed is the key here. Because of the mental requirement of this style of training, it requires your mental focus, like intention. It should be optimally performed first in a workout. Then after you've done that, you will go over to your base strength exercises. This will be, if you're a bit confused up until this point, keep watching. I will explain this more in depth later, trust me. But second, after the speed exercises, we do the base strength exercises, and those are the compound lifts. What defines a compound lift will vary between different coaches and schools. If you watch the next video or read the next book, they will maybe have a different definition of what they are, but for the sake of simplicity, let's take a deadlift variation, a squat variation, a press variation, and a pull variation. For example, a back squat, a conventional deadlift, a bench press, and a pull-up. The goal here is to develop maximal force production, which is independent of time, which is that raw, slow, maximal strength. This will be your roof, your base, which we will translate you to usable speed later through our speed and explosive exercises. And when it comes to volume and intensity, we will discuss this later in the video as well. Finally, we will end our workout with isolation lifts or accessory exercises. And those target specific muscles and are good for addressing weaknesses, weak links in your body, and strengthening specific ligaments to prevent injuries. It will also develop, or contribute rather, to the strength development of your compound lifts. One example could be, maybe you have weak hamstrings, so you do the hamstring curl. You want to get stronger biceps for like hand fighting in wrestling, so you do the bicep curls and grip strengthening exercises. Maybe your opponents pull your head too much and you want to strengthen your neck, so you do neck strengthening exercises. Whatever you choose, please make sure you can include a core strengthening exercise, like your abdominal muscles, a sit-up, a Russian twist, ab wheel, whatever you want. The core needs to be strong because you always brace your core when you do a powerful movement, and it is the center of your body, and this must be kept strong and stable for numerous reasons. And isolated lifts, as I said, are optimally done at the end of the workout. One common mistake if your goal is to develop maximal strength is doing too many repetitions with too little rest in between. You see, when you're doing maximal strength training, you're using your most powerful energy system in your body, the ATP-PC system, and this requires a couple of minutes of rest because you need to recover your creatine phosphate system, the creatine. That is the fuel for this type of strength training. And if you rest too little, it'll be more like a lactic acid or cardio workout, if you will. It depends on the intensity. And obviously those are important aspects of wrestling too, but if our goal is to develop strength, we need to consistently lift heavy weights and rest enough to be able to do it again and again. We need to increase our maximal strength. So save the high repetition, low rest type of training for your circuit training or endurance training sessions. Let's focus on strength here. Now let's start with our first component of our lifting day, which is the speed or explosive type of exercises. And throughout this video you will obviously see a lot of graphs and statistics and things of that nature, and seriously, take those with a pinch of salt, like everything else. This is a way too complicated issue and to make absolute rules out of it. They are very situation dependent. I can't give you an absolute rule out of everything, because if I had that solution I would probably be a millionaire right now. It doesn't work that way. It depends on the situation. I am simply giving you a very generalized picture here. So our goal is to basically increase the power production, and if you have watched my previous videos, you know what the definition of power is by now. That is why all the movements when it comes to speed exercises has to be performed with maximal intention of speed and velocity. This is what is known as a force-velocity curve, and as you can see, it contains different components. It is the relationship between force and velocity. First we have that raw speed component, which is basically unweighted training. Maximal speed training without weights, very minimal external resistance, which works on your raw speed, like raw speed. No external weights. You can do rounds of 20 meters to 100 meters with maximal effort, as if your life depended on it, as if you're being chased by some lion or something, a gorilla. Basically maximal movement. You have no resistance here, so you can just go all out. Obviously here the rest periods are higher too, because you're using your most powerful system in your body, so longer rest periods, like 4 to 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Our next component is speed strength, which is velocity or speed under light load rather than absolute speed like we talked about previously. This style of training includes ballistic exercises like jumping squats. You put very light squats on your back and you jump as high as you can to develop speed under a bit of resistance at least. And we also have medicine ball throws, overhead toss, chest passes, which is very popular amongst boxers who want to develop knockout power, or soccer players, basketball players, any ball sport or punching sport, throwing sport. Finally, we have Olympic lifts, but with lighter intensities, 20 to 60% of 1 rep maximum. The reason of this is because we want to focus more on speed strength, like speed rather than raw strength. That is why we use lighter weights, so it enables us to use maximal speed. Finally, we have power. This is the perfect balance of speed and strength. It is both ends of the spectrum, somewhere in the middle. The perfect option I have for this is the Olympic lifts at 60 to 80% of your 1 rep maximum, moderate to heavy weights. This is very specific to wrestling, because wrestling also is a perfect balance of speed and strength, so I would imagine that this would usually be the main area most people need in wrestling terms. And obviously the further we go on this graph, the more we go into raw strength, but that is not our focus for this component, so we're just gonna ignore them and focus on the speed components. We will talk more about raw strength training later. And yeah, this is a lot of information. I can imagine it can be pretty overwhelming for some of you, like which style of speed training should you do? And I wish I could simplify this the best I could. I don't know which area you need the most work on. It depends on your needs. But if you want a very general answer, I can tell you that the power clean, which is a component of the Olympic lift, is very useful to wrestling, because it is very wrestling specific. It is similar to many wrestling movements, a takedown, an extension of the hips, and it is that perfect combination of strength and speed which you need in wrestling. So I really recommend you, if you have the opportunity, to get qualified help to learn that lift and program it into your strength training routine. Most wrestling moves involve an extension of the hips, so the power clean is a perfect alternative to address that, because it's very wrestling specific and similar to many wrestling moves. The downside, however, is that it can be very technically demanding. However, there are easier alternatives to this exercise which I talk about in my past videos. Please check them out. So, as our goal is speed and power development, we want to use our fastest and most powerful energy system in our body, the ATP-PCR system. And this requires very powerful intentions. And because we use this system, the repetitions must be kept low in order to ensure good quality and high effort repetitions. If we go too high, we will lose that quality. So I would say maximum 4 repetitions per set, sometimes even more, but it depends. If your goal is to develop speed strength, that is raw speed, you would use intensities of 20 to 60% of 1 rep maximum. And if your goal is raw power development, you will go heavier. It depends. And I also understand that many people might not be technically proficient in this exercise, or for any reason might not have a reliable 1 rep maximum. Then I would recommend you go by feeling for a while, under a qualified coach of course. You need to know what you are doing. This exercise can be dangerous if you don't have the fundamentals in check. So always do this under professional supervision, of course. Next up we have the base strength exercises. So our goal here will be to develop strength that is independent of time, that raw strength that we're after. This will involve the compound lifts, and like I talked about earlier, different schools and coaches will have different definition of what's regarded as a compound lift, but to make things easy for you, an exercise from each one of those categories that you can see. Those are usually done right after those speed and explosive exercises that we talked about earlier, so in other words, in the middle of the workout. So once again, how many sets and repetitions? How heavy should you go? I am glad you asked. Sports science is a science like every other science, therefore there will always be different graphs and statistics and explanations and all of that, but they can only help us to a certain limit. Take your own experience into consideration too, like use your common sense as well. But short answer is the rep range you will use will depend on your goal. If your goal is hypertrophy, you will use higher repetitions, like if you want to grow muscle mass, higher repetitions. If you want to grow that raw strength, like the maximal slow strength, you want to use low repetitions. However, realize that you will not magically just get bigger by lifting more repetitions if your goal is hypertrophy, for example. Food matters too. And also, hypertrophy is still present when you're doing the strength scheme and vice versa, just at different levels. But I am guessing your goal, most of your goals are to develop maximal strength, so we will stick to the low repetitions in that case. Compound lifts can also be used to develop endurance, but it's probably not a good idea as there are better wrestling specific alternatives to that. And here we have some examples of rep sets and intensity and volume schemes that you can use for different goals. As you can see, the intensity and volume decreases the heavier we get and vice versa. Also, the rest period will depend on which rep scheme you're doing, your goal. Like if you do maximal strength training, you have to rest enough to recover that creatine phosphate system, and if you want to do hypertrophy or endurance style training, you rest shorter. And here is a study on how rest time affects performance on various exercises. You can look it up and read it if you want to. So, which variations should you stick to? I'm gonna have to be boring here and tell you. It depends. So let's start with 3 common deadlift variations to begin with. The conventional deadlift, the sumo, and the trap bar deadlift. They all have their pros and cons. None of them are better than the other one. It depends on your anatomy, your technical proficiency, which one you're the most comfortable with. There is a million factors. I really can't tell you which one is the best for you, because I can't monitor your training. I can't see who you are as an athlete. This will be something you have to find out yourself. However, realize that, for example, if we compare the conventional and the sumo deadlift, usually they target different musculature, but not in a significant level that will drastically affect your wrestling performance. I would say that the conventional and the trap bar deadlifts are a good choice to wrestling. If you want to do sumo deadlift, if you're most enthusiastic about it, go ahead and do it, but those 2 that I mentioned before, they are probably, note that I say probably, the most similar to wrestling. And also when it comes to the trap bar deadlift, it is generally the easier version to learn. And if you're a busy wrestler that doesn't have a lot of time in the gym, it could be a good bet, the trap bar deadlift. But once again, choose the one that you're most comfortable with. The differences are not very significant. So next up we have our squat variations, and the 3 main variations are the high bar back squat, the low bar back squat, and the front squats. They have different mobility demands, especially when it comes to ankle mobility, and target different muscles, but fundamentally they are all the same. As you can see, the center of balance are different on the squat variations. In the low bar back squat, which is most common amongst powerlifters, you have this slight forward lean and the backside is more targeted, while in the front squat and the high bar back squat you have this upright torso, which is very specific to wrestling, and the ankle mobility is much more demanded here, and I would actually say that it is more similar to wrestling, especially when it comes to the front squat, because you lift from the front and you really have this wrestling specific back position when it comes to lifting opponents and extending your hips and ankles and all of that. But the differences are very slight. I would still say like do the ones you're most comfortable and enthusiastic about. Like our goal is just to develop strength. We don't have to dive too deep into this if we don't have the time for it especially. But if you do Olympic weightlifting as a supplement, it is very imperative that you do the high bar back squats and the front squats. The low bar back squat doesn't have as much transferability to the Olympic lifts, so keep that in mind. But once again, any strength training is good for you when it comes to wrestling, and do the one that you're most comfortable with. So why are squats important to wrestling, you say? Well, it is primarily leg strength that squats works on. And let's say you go for a double leg takedown and you have a good entry, but you just can't seem to finish that takedown because you lack explosiveness and strength in your legs. This is a situation where squats are beneficial for you. Or for example, when you want to defend a takedown and your opponent enters perfectly, but you just seem to be stronger than them. You have those heavy hips, you push down your legs so powerfully that despite their perfect entry, they just can't seem to finish you. This is also a situation where leg strength or squatting power can help you. So next up we have our pressing variations, and I have chosen here 4 very common pressing variations, as you can see. The bench press, strict press, push press, and the dips. They are all very beneficial for you, obviously. Once again, choose the one you're the most comfortable about. No one is the same. We all have different anatomies, different needs, different responses to different exercises. Once again, I can't say this is the best one for you. But if you want to think in terms of wrestling specificity, like those fast twitch, like explosive movements and all of that, the push press is exactly what works on that, as well as your pushing strength. See, the bench press, strict press, and the dips, it is this slow type of like pressing power. It's very strength based, just slow strength. You can do them explosively too, yes, but the push press on the other hand is similar to the Olympic lifts. It is of that explosive nature because you use your leg drive and you push at the same time, so it's total body but focused on pushing. Which is why I really prefer the push press to any other when it comes to wrestling, considering that you can do it. It requires a lot of mobility because you have to keep your weight in this front squat position and push the weight up in the air. But once again, you use leg drive and it is of this explosive nature that we're after. And by all means, if you can't do that, like the other alternatives are very good as well. Bench press is also very specific to wrestling because it is this horizontal push strength. When you're wrestling someone, you meet them toe to toe horizontally. And you also have the highest potential for weights, loads, so you can develop faster. The strict press is more similar to a push press, but you don't use the leg drive. It is exclusively your shoulder muscles and your arms that's pushing the weight up. And we also have the dips, which are very accessible. I mean, it's just 2 bars sticking out. You can do them anywhere. You can begin with your body weight and then you add external weights with a weight band or a chain. But it is pretty hard to progress weight-wise when it comes to the dips because it is such an isolated exercise. But it is an excellent alternative as well, but just be careful, do them correctly, as they can somewhat have a pretty large margin of error compared to the other pushing exercises. And finally, we have the pulling variations. We have vertical pulling exercises and horizontal pulling exercises. Honestly, you just have to vary between vertical and horizontal pulling exercises. I really can't tell you exactly which one is the most beneficial to wrestling when it comes to those 2 categories. Like, honestly, do any of them, but do them correctly. That's for another video on how to do those exercises correctly, and I mean, there is tons of materials out there that show you how to do those exercises correctly. You don't need my channel, there is already a million material. Like, I'm trying to reinvent the wheel if I'm gonna show you technique on how to do a pull-up or chin-up. Just vary between those. And I mean, pulling is probably the most commonly used movement in wrestling. Anything that you do in wrestling often requires a pull, so this needs to be in check. It needs to be strong as hell. You pull your head, you pull the legs towards you, you pull the body, your opponent's body towards you. It's all pulling in wrestling, so make sure this is strong and work on it like every training session. If you do 3 strength training sessions a week, we'll go into this later in the video, you should always include a pulling exercise. But just vary between vertical and horizontal. Maybe you can do both in the same day if you have the energy and the time, but Usually you can stick to one of them every session. And finally we have our accessory exercises, or the isolated lifts, and the goal here is to target specific muscles, for example a weak link in your body that needs extra work. Normally when you do a compound exercise like the deadlift, it's usually the whole body, but it's not isolated, like it doesn't target a specific muscle. If a specific muscle needs extra work, you can choose an isolated exercise. Let's say, and your weak link, like that's very specific to you, it's very individual, no one has the same weak link. Let's say Tom thinks he gets headlocked too often, he attributes this to having a weak neck, so he starts to incorporate neck strengthening exercises. Or perhaps you have a weak lower back and you notice that when you're going for a double leg takedown, when you do a back squat, like you maybe forward lean, or you just notice that your lower back is weak, then you can incorporate an exercise like back extensions or good mornings. It depends on you individually. So, how many repetitions should we do here? How many sets? Accessory lifts are isolated by their nature, so our goal is not to develop strength per se, but to stabilize and develop the musculature. We want to get stronger ligaments in that specific area, so they can contribute to our overall strength when it comes to the compound lifts and the wrestling itself, of course. So I would do this the hypertrophy style training, that is over 6 repetitions, 6 to 12, it depends on the exercise. If you do a body weight sit up, for example, you can even go higher than that, like 20, 30, it depends on the exercise. And how heavy should you go? Well, because those lifts are isolated, you can't progress as fast as you can in a bench press or a deadlift, for example, so use your common sense. Go by feeling, but don't compromise your technique. They should be challenging but manageable. Use your common sense. And some very common weak links amongst wrestlers are the core musculature, the neck strength, and the grip strength. Those are very visible if you lack strength in them. Like if you struggle in a deadlift, for example, to lift a deadlift or lift your opponents in the air, defend double leg takedown attacks, the gut wrench, all of that, it is very visible in your core strength. So work on your core strength. Neck strength is very important for everything in wrestling. You use your head in wrestling more than you can imagine. And also grip strength, of course. Those are very common weak links that usually most people need work on. So now with this information we're gonna design a little strength training day for ourselves. And optimally, especially if you're in the off season, I would do 3 strength training days every week. You can do 2 as well, but 3 is very optimal. I will explain later why. First, we will start with our speed or power exercises, because like I said earlier, they require the freshest state you can possibly be in, because you use speed and power, those fast twitch muscle fibers. And you remember the alternatives when it came to the speed and power exercises? We have the Olympic lifts, the ballistic training, medicine ball throws, plyometrics, and all of that. I will make videos on them in the future, and I have some material in my previous videos as well, you can watch them. But let's take the power cleans here because of their specificity to wrestling and their similarity to hip extensions and all of that. So let's choose power cleans in this case. There are other alternatives too as well. 5x3 at 75 to 85 of your 1 rep maximum, considering you have a reliable 1 rep maximum. Otherwise, you can go by feeling under professional supervision. Then after that, we go over to our base strength exercises. And from here, this is a bit tricky. From here, you can choose between the deadlift, the squat, and the press. Choose one of them, and directly after that, choose a pulling variation. The pulls you can do right after your base strength exercises as well. It is a base strength exercise, yes, but it is not as fatiguing as the rest, so you can always include them as well. In this case, let's dedicate this to the back squat this day. So the back squat is our main exercise for this day. Let's do 5x5 on 70 to 80% of 1 rep maximum. The 5x5 works on your strength and hypertrophy very good, so you might need that in this case, for example. And then after that we do pull-ups, 3x10 on body weight. Later we go over to accessory exercises, and let's say we have this athlete has a weak hamstrings, he needs extra work on his biceps and core, so this is what we add here, like around 4 accessory exercises. It depends on how much time you have, how fatigued you are, how heavy you go. Like, once again, use your common sense here. Make sure, however, to always include a core exercise in your accessory. I would say it's almost mandatory, because the core is the center of your body. It's very important. You need a strong core for almost everything. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and just remember, I can only include so much in one video. There's a lot more to cover, but I will save that for future videos, and I will definitely include a program in the future as well where I show detailed execution of every lift for every day. But you have to realize that when it comes to programs like this, it's impossible to do a one size fits all. Everyone has different needs. I can't make one program that suits everyone equally. Thank you for watching.